Lord Mervyn Davies of Abersock, Your Excellency Sarah Halton, Your Excellency Saroja Sirisena, members of the High Commission in Colombo, friends of Sri Lanka. I'm very happy to be here with you this evening to share some informal thoughts. When changes of considerable significance are taking place in both our countries, in Sri Lanka as well as the United Kingdom. I think it was then Prime Minister Theresa May who, addressing the Conservative Party conference in 2016, for the first time used the phrase Global Britain in 2016. I think that now the time has now come to give substance and meaning to that phrase, not just as an aspiration, as a concept, but something that is fully capable of being translated into reality. And I think the circumstances are now certainly propitious to embark on that adventure. After Brexit, Britain is earnest in her endeavour to find new markets, new countries with which to strengthen her economic and commercial relations. And I would venture to suggest to you this evening that there is no country better than Sri Lanka for Britain to take a long, hard look at when it comes to strengthening, deepening, and enriching commercial and business relations. Now, the reason why I say this is that British entrepreneurs will, in every way, feel unreservedly comfortable in Sri Lanka. Because our value systems, the foundations not only of our public law, but really in every walk of life, you will find that British values, customs, and traditions have profoundly influenced Sri Lanka. I will give you one striking example. At the height of the Second World War, there was action taken by the British governor of Ceylon, as the country was then called, to order the deportation of an Australian national who happened to be working in the tea gardens of the island. He was accused of having made some incendiary statements that were disrespectful of the British administration. And the governor resorted to arbitrary, capricious action, ordering his immediate deportation from the country. Now, this was at the height of the World War. He was a man of limited means, a humble person, no access to wealth or power, but he went to court and asked that his rights be protected, humble and defenseless as he was. The British Chief Justice of Ceylon at that time, Sir Sidney Abrahams, in a very inspiring judgment, which is read even today, not only in Ceylon, not only in Sri Lanka, but throughout the Commonwealth. He said, the sanctity of the writ of habeas corpus must prevail over all else. Now, the writ of habeas corpus is British in origin, and British in the avenues of development which that remedy has followed throughout the Commonwealth. The liberty of the citizen and the protection that is afforded to that right as the central thread running through the whole of our public law. So in your own country, in the United Kingdom, it was Lord Atkin who said in the House of Lords, amidst the clash of arms, the laws are not silent. That was a pronouncement by Lord Atkin. And in my own country, a British Chief Justice, when the interests of the British sovereign were thought to be threatened at that time, had the courage and the fortitude to uphold what he saw as one of the seminal values of English public law. So that's a very telling illustration. But if a British entrepreneur were to go to Sri Lanka, in many ways he would not think that he was in an alien country. The legal system is founded entirely upon British antecedents. The whole of our law governing shipping, insurance, our company law, the entirety of our law relating to intellectual property, copyrights, patents, trademarks, all of that is entirely English law. Now, there is at the moment, I understand, significant interest in this country in establishing a center of arbitration in Sri Lanka. This is a matter that I mentioned to Her Excellency Sarah Halton this morning. Soon after, I had the privilege of meeting the British Foreign and Commonwealth Secretary, the Right Honourable Elizabeth Truss. Now, I think if you do that, you would be rendering yeoman service, because there is a yawning lacuna in the legal system of our country. We have judges of unimpeachable caliber. We have a highly developed legal system which has been nurtured and enriched by judges and scholars who have studied in British universities. But we can do with a vibrant institution in the field of arbitration and conciliation. So if you do that, you would be responding to an urgently perceived need. Now, I said that a British entrepreneur coming to our country will feel very much at home. One of the reasons for that assertion is what we share in common with regard to education. High Commissioner Sarah Halton was remarking just a few minutes ago that this is one of the strongest bonds that unify, that bring together our two countries. We are legitimately proud of our achievements in the field of education. We have free and compulsory education in our country. University education is also free. Not only does a student not have to pay fees, but throughout his or her undergraduate career, the student is supported by the state. Maintenance allowance, financial provision for books, everything that is needed until the student graduates. Now, I don't think I'm doing anything wrong if I mention one instance which was brought to my notice by our High Commissioner in London last night. She told me that the Vice Chancellor of Leicester University is a 100% product of the free education system in our country. I cannot, in all honesty, claim to be a product of the free education system. But the Vice Chancellor of Leicester University is. He went to school in Jaffna during the height of the war in our own country. He received his education there. His performance at examinations was exemplary. He obtained a fully paid scholarship that was offered to him by the University of Oxford. And he has now reached the pinnacle of academic achievement in the United Kingdom. That's not the only example. AstraZeneca, the Oxford initiative, one of the pioneers there was a Sri Lankan lady of whom we are inordinately proud. And one can go on, so many examples. Sri Lankans of great academic promise have made a signal contribution to the economic life of the United Kingdom in a variety of fields: information technology, the NHS, financial services, and so on. Now, a British entrepreneur coming to Sri Lanka will find that we are not resting on our laurels. We are constantly challenging ourselves. We are evaluating, assessing the pragmatic value of the education that we impart to our students. His Excellency Gotabaya Rajapaksa and I embarked on what I consider to be a very opportune adventure 2 months ago. We asked teachers, parents, principals, alumni associations in our country to give the government the benefit of their ideas and suggestions about modernizing education in Sri Lanka, both the substance, the content of education, as well as the methods that we use in imparting knowledge to our students. We received about 2,300 responses, some of which are certainly worth acting on. One of the major challenges in our country is to ensure the pragmatic utility of the education that we provide, the needs of the marketplace, and to ensure that our curricula are designed in such a way as to ensure gainful employment to the products of the system once they complete their education. So we are constantly improving our system, not complacent, not satisfied with its condition as it is. So education is indisputably one of our priorities. So is health. As I address you this evening, Sri Lanka has managed to vaccinate 82% of the eligible population. So that is the main reason why we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. We have begun manufacturing pharmaceutical products in our own country. Saline, for example. We have been spending large volumes of foreign exchange importing saline into our country. But now in the districts of Anuradhapura, Kandy and Hambantota, we are manufacturing drugs that are required by our own population. There's also a surplus that we think we shall soon be able to send to the Maldives and to several countries in East Africa. And there are Sri Lankans of distinction who have made an indelible mark on the NHS in your own country. What are the other reasons why I am justified in my assertion that British entrepreneurs will find Sri Lanka a very congenial environment in which to do business? Look at our labor laws. They conform to the most stringent criteria imposed by the International Labour Organization. Our companies like Brandix, MAS Holdings, have rendered yeoman service by bringing about what I would describe, without exaggeration, as a social transformation in our country. Look at our garment factories. 95% of the people who work there are women. Vistas of opportunity that could not have been dreamt of by their grandfathers or even their fathers. A new lifestyle, social mobility, all of this has been made possible. During the last 7 months or so, there has been a raft of legislation enacted by the Sri Lankan Parliament with regard to the minimum age at which children can be employed, conditions of service in factories, imposing an absolute prohibition on the employment of children in what are regarded as hazardous industries, all of that. Then our signal achievements in marketing. Take Dilmah, for example. I think the government of Sri Lanka has a great deal to learn from a company like that when it comes to the techniques of marketing. So, Sri Lanka is a rich reservoir of commercial expertise. Apart from labor practices, the environment. His Excellency President Gotabaya Rajapaksa will be participating in the COP26 event, which is being organized in Glasgow by the British Prime Minister. Sri Lanka is hosting a side event, and it is our firm resolve by 2030 to ensure that 70% of our energy requirement will come from renewable sources. And by 2050, we have the realistic, not fanciful expectation that our country will be carbon free. The Commonwealth has ordered Sri Lanka by recognizing Sri Lanka as a blue economy champion. And what is known as the Colombo Declaration on sustainable nitrogen management has been very warmly welcomed throughout the world. So, not only in labor, but in matters connected with the environment as well. Sri Lanka is very much in the vanguard of things. Now, just one other thing I want to mention before I conclude. Apart from all of this, our legal, our financial, our administrative systems, apart from all of this, I stressed this point when I met the Right Honourable Elizabeth Truss this afternoon. I told her, if a British company were to invest in Sri Lanka, just consider the practical advantages. Just leave aside everything that I have said so far, but focus on this one matter. The United Kingdom is engaged in discussions with several countries with a view to entering into free trade agreements. Right now, the United Kingdom is talking to the United States, to Australia, to New Zealand, and to India. At the moment, the UK does not have an FTA with India. And it is likely that there would be an FTA in due course. But as we have thought, when we negotiate FTAs, the devil is in the detail. It takes a long time. So it is unlikely to come to fruition before about the middle of next year, at the earliest. It may be a bit later. But we already have an FTA with India and also with Pakistan. So if a British company were to come to Sri Lanka, comply with the rules of origin and the rules relating to value addition, it's approximately 30% value addition, either in terms of services or raw materials. Then the products that are made in Sri Lanka are entitled to duty-free access into the markets of the entire subcontinent. Not a reduction, of duty, but a total waiver of duty. Prime Minister Narendra Modi declaring open an international airport in India 4 days ago said that he was doing this primarily to cater for the ever-increasing, the sophisticated demands of the Indian middle class, which has phenomenal spending power, the middle class of India. Now, Britain can access that middle class through the conduit of Sri Lanka. That is, Sri Lanka to be used as a hub. The domestic market of Sri Lanka is obviously modest. But you are not confined to the domestic market of Sri Lanka. There are other horizons, other vistas that will be opened up. And that seems to me to be a compelling argument for investment in Sri Lanka because of the huge competitive advantage that a company would gain by doing so. So this is why it gives me a particular pleasure to be associated with you here on this occasion when the UK-Sri Lanka Business Council is being inaugurated. And what makes the event even more significant is the gracious presence of Lord Mervyn Davies of Abersock, the special envoy of the British Prime Minister for Sri Lankan trade. We would like to pay tribute to his indefatigable energy, the sustained interest that he has taken in developing Britain's commercial relations with our country. And I have urged him to visit us once again as early as possible so that he can see for himself the developments which have taken place on the ground in Sri Lanka in excruciatingly difficult circumstances in the recent past. And I think that would enthuse and embolden British entrepreneurs to come into our country and to partner with us in the exciting adventure of moving our country ahead. Thank you very much indeed.